said Socrates, that she forgets the natural beauty of the rose and so decides to counterfeit it here. Does she not understand the wonder of the flower itself, its sweet delight that lifts one's very soul towards heaven? How can she fail to appreciate this reflection of a greater beauty still? My friend, Virgil replied, can she neglect its beauty as you say? See how enraptured she is at its sight. Socrates shook his head, saying, if she were truly to value it, she would set aside her pencil and spend her time in contemplation. As it is, she spends it indulging in vanity. Her drawing may draw some admiration, but it can never match reality. The objections of Socrates to the artists he called the imitators are brought forth in Plato's work, The Republic. As an ardent pursuer of truth and wisdom, Plato could see no use for images that, like reflections in a mirror, were mere appearances of real objects. The imitator is a long way off from the truth and can do all things because he lightly touches on a small part of them, and that part, an image. The painter might at first seem to be a magician, for he can conjure up any image to appear on his canvas at will, but a second glance reveals that his skill only applies to images, never reality. Images, unless they are allegorical and capable of illustrating virtue or vice, cannot instruct the mind in wisdom, and appearances are a shallow reflection of truth. A painter will paint a cobbler or any other artist, though he knows nothing of their arts, and, if he is a good artist, may deceive children or simple persons, and they will fancy they are looking at a real carpenter. A true lover of wisdom should be intent upon avoiding such traps of deception, and the secret instinct driving him to seek external diversion and occupation, which is a result of man's constant state of wretchedness. Painting is only a vain diversion that distracts men from knowing themselves and knowing truth, an empty and deceitful art that impairs knowledge and learning. Virgil listened to his companion's objections and considered his words for a moment. I understand what you are saying. It may seem that such activity bears little fruit. Still, I think not that she undervalues the rose's beauty, but rather the opposite. Have you ever seen a boy mimic his father or a girl her mother at work? Many times, said Socrates. You see, their shapeless, scrap-wood constructions or flavorless mud pies are worthless in comparison to a well-made cabinet or meal, but the children pour their love and delight into these little projects. Their imitations are not so much counterfeits as they are emulations of their parents. Virgil looked back to the girl's drawing. It may be that she was so struck with delight in the reality of the rose that she was moved to respond. She knows that her drawing falls short in comparison, but matching or exceeding the true object is not her aim. She desires only, like a child, to emulate it, and through that to share her delight with others. That may be, Socrates replied, but do you not think she would do better to spend her time elsewhere? Perhaps she does not undervalue it, but could she appreciate it in a better way? Why persist in her work if she knows, as you say, that it will inevitably fall short instead of pursuing excellence in worthier activities, such as geometry? Virgil smiled at the great questioner and said, I will not presume to know what I do not. We cannot see into another's heart, and so our answers must be confined to speculation. Well said, Virgil. Let us speculate then, and see what we may learn from one another. Since I am defending my position that the activity of imitating reality with a brush or pencil is vanity, it is only fair to have you ask what questions you will. Very well, Virgil replied. I shall do my best to help us both search out the truth. He sat down on the grass under the rose bushes, thinking hard to find his first question. So, he said at last, you believe that painting and other like activities are merely vain diversions from the truth. Is it true that such activities bear no fruit at all? I believe so, Virgil. While the result may be pretty to look at, it does not, as you yourself admitted, match the beauty of the real object. By your face, however, I see that you would contest my idea. Come, my friend, share your thoughts with me. Do you think there is more to these imitations than I have said? If a painter's aim was to deceive, then he could indeed be censured and shunned as a charlatan. His images, however, are not intended to be a counterfeit of reality. Often, the painter takes up his brush in response to some object or scene that strikes him as beautiful, and a desire to share that beauty with others. Other times, he uses his images to tell a story, bringing the viewer's attention to certain details that highlight his particular theme. Johann Vermeer, in his painting of A Woman Holding a Balance, uses light shadows to emphasize important details such as the woman's face and hands, the scales, the open jewelry box, and the picture behind her. Crafted in the image of a creative God, human beings have an inherent desire for creating. Just as a child might imitate his or her parents, so men seek to emulate and imitate God, however much they may fall short. Also, imitations is a means by which people can learn about the world around them. Imitation is natural to man from childhood, one of his advantages over the lower animals being this, that he is the most imitative creature in the world and learns first by imitation. A person who has never seen an elephant may be shown a picture of one, and while the image does not give a full understanding of the creature itself, it may serve as a helpful tool for gaining knowledge. According to Aristotle, the reason of the delight in seeing a picture is that one is at the same time learning. What then must one say of the images that do not serve this purpose? Is there value to be found in a simple drawing of a rose, in a painting of a bowl of fruit, or Vermeer's The Lady Writing? This latter picture portrays a woman sitting at her table, glancing up from the letter she is writing. There is nothing at all extraordinary about the event other than the fact that Vermeer chose to capture the moment on canvas. It does not illustrate a dramatic tale or allegory, rather, it shares a passing moment of common life that others might not have noticed. Painting has a special ability to bring to light the beautiful in what is ordinary, whether it be in a moment of happiness or a handful of flowers, a craftsman at work or a child in a garden. Through this capacity, the painter not only emulates the God who created him, but can share with others some of the beauty of creation that they, in the busy turmoil of their lives, might otherwise have missed. Socrates nodded slowly as Virgil concluded his argument, saying when he had finished, "I will not cling to ideas that are found wanting in truth. It may be that you are in the right, and certainly I will not deny that the works of a painter may indeed spur one's mind to the contemplation of beauty." "I thank you, friend," Virgil said. "Shall we continue in our walk?" Socrates agreed, and they moved on, walking until a burst of laughter greeted them. A handful of students, equipped with neatly stapled scripts, was gathered around a table in the shade of one of the live oaks. A boy was reading his part, and Virgil stopped to listen. "Love me? Why, it must be requited. I hear how I am censured. They say I shall bear myself proudly if I perceive the love come from her. I must not seem proud. Happy are they that hear their detractions and can put them to mending." Socrates noticed that Virgil lingered by them and stopped as well. "What so captured your attention, Virgil?" "I was listening to them practice," he answered, indicating the students. "It is delightful to see them take so much pleasure in words well written." Socrates chuckled quietly to himself, causing his companion to glance quizzically at him. "Why did you laugh, Socrates?" Virgil queried. "Please, Virgil, do not take offense. I laughed because I had forgotten that you were one of the poets. I should not be so surprised that you are susceptible to the charm of pretty phrases. I suspect that you, Socrates, consider this to be my weakness. You know my thoughts regarding the fancies of poetry. If ever an activity could be charged with counterfeiting, exaggerating, and distorting reality, it would be the composition of dramatic poetry." "I am sorry that you think so," said Virgil, "for I believe there is much beauty, yes, and truth, to be discovered within it. May I ask why you object to it so fervently?" Socrates replied, "I do not object to comely words and well-turned phrases, for they in themselves are harmless enough. However, they are cheapened by the use to which they are put, a means of seducing the mind and feeding the passions. They move one to weep or laugh or sigh with each turn of the tale, playing upon one's emotions as upon a recorder, changing the pitch with each change of the wind. In the end, what is it but vanity and emptiness, or worse than that, vile falsehood?" In the Republic and his other dialogues, Plato exhorted men to live in accordance with virtue rather than as slaves to their own passions. He saw passion at the root of most vices, rage, lust, intemperance, greed, and many others. The soul, he reasoned, did not belong amid the violent storms of feeling that whirl through man's mortal material body, but rather up in heaven, where it could clearly see the perfect immaterial forms of all things. Passion and desire, however, bound soul to body and therefore to earth and imperfect matter. Plato's greatest objection to the poets was that they told stories that were not only inferior imitations of reality, but that also presented inflated displays of passion. The poet's art awakens and nourishes and strengthens the feelings and impairs the reason. Moreover, words, with the aid of memory, have tremendous power to influence the mind. Therefore, one must take great care to nourish his mind and memory with words that lift the soul towards what is good, rather than poison them with what is evil. In a world where man must struggle to maintain mastery over his emotions and desires, to indulge in fantasies that focus on passion seems not only frivolous, but harmful and corrupting to the seeker of wisdom, truth, and righteousness. Virgil gazed at the beaming faces of the students and pondered for a while before he spoke. "Socrates, your concerns are valid without doubt. There are many instances in which those of my trade have misused their gift. using it to call admiration to themselves by fueling ignoble passions, all the while spinning their stories out of dandelion down. Still, must this poor fruit cast its shadow over greater works? Surely, as there is potential for harm, there must also be a capacity for good. There could be, I'm sure, said Socrates, but I fear that any good would be cast aside in favor of those meaner works that appeal only to the passions. Even those compositions that have been considered great are marred by woeful displays of emotion. The imitative poet who aims at being popular is not by nature made, nor is his art intended, to please or affect the rational principle in the soul, but he will prefer the passionate and fitful temper. Would any reader take up Homer's Iliad if he could not weep with Achilles? Would anyone sigh over Shakespeare's plays if his characters did not sigh first? If Claudio bore patiently the perceived unfaithfulness of his betrothed, or Leonato the wrong done to his daughter, would their names have ever been remembered? Very likely they would not, but you speak of that as if it were bad. What do you mean by that, Virgil? I do not understand you. Why would it not be? Virgil answered, I mean that such passion is a necessary part of story, simply because it is a necessary quality of human life. You believe it to be unfortunate, but without passion or emotion, we would not be human beings. Plato's accusation against the dramatic poets are not unreasonable. Most stories do involve an emphasis on human passion in one way or another, and, like paintings, their depictions of life will always fall short in comparison with the story woven by the author of life. Plato, however, neglected the fact that our emotions, such as compassion, anger, joy, and sorrow, are as fundamental to humanity as rationality. Man possesses reason because he was made in the image of a rational God, but emotion is also a reminder of that image. Another essential element of humanity is a desire for community, as seen when the Lord says of Adam, "It is not good for man to be alone." Stories are a means by which people share ideas and experiences, for even in works of fiction and fantasy contain some reality relating to human character. Through reading, hearing, or watching the way characters interact with one another and their circumstances, one's attention is turned outward, away from himself, allowing him to gain clearer vision into, or simply be reminded of, human nature. Socrates considered his response. I understand that stories are meant to convey human nature and experience. However, it seems to me that they tend to display man's imperfection, his passions and desires and struggles on account of those passions and desires, rather than a noble pursuit of the immaterial. Virgil explained, Socrates, my friend, it is impossible to speak of humanity without passion, desires, or struggles on account of them. Even philosophy, the love of wisdom, involves passion, a passion for what is true. You yourself recognize good passions and exhort men to develop them. We are made in the image of a God who passionately desires his children, who grieves over their wickedness and delights in their repentance. One need only look to the scriptures to see joyful, exuberant worship, desperate cries for help, and bitter sorrow. It is true that this world is broken, and that sin is also now an inherent piece in the human story. But even through that, there can be redemption and salvation. We, alas, learned this too late. But for the living, both the passions and ideas they share are all reflections of the image they bear, whether they know it or not. For the sake of the argument, Virgil, I will accept your explanation and offer you a different objection. You say that an intrinsic element in the works of the tragedians and dramatic poets is the human struggle with sin, and that this is inescapable because it is a part of human nature. I do say so, Socrates, Virgil answered. Well then, would you not agree that with the powers of influence possessed by these works, it would be healthier to put them off entirely, rather than to have one's mind filled with pictures of sin and temptation? No, Socrates, said Virgil carefully, I think it would be better to approach such works with discernment. It is true that there are some that would glorify the sin itself, which would be corrupting to the heart and mind. But if a sin is shown in its proper light and not dwelt upon in excess, then stories can't fulfill their purpose of enriching the mind and soul. Every well-spun tale will stir the reader's heart to some emotion. What distinguishes a great story from a poor one is whether that emotion is used to point toward what is good. The power of poetry and drama lies in the ability to present simplified portions of life in a manner that brings to light a particular theme. Plato feared that this power would be used as emotional flattery, weakening the good and seekers of the good. It was his belief that it would be better to reject poetry and drama altogether rather than risk facing the temptation of their possible evils. If this belief were so, would it not be best for every man to eschew all social interaction with his fellows, since in every conversation there is a potential for evil? It is good to flee from temptation, but one must not starve oneself to avoid the risk of poison. St. Augustine writes in The City of God that when the will abandons what is above itself and turns toward what is lower, it becomes evil, not because it is evil to which it turns, but because the turning itself is wicked. His definition of evil is a turning away from what is good, ultimately turning away from God. When words are used to corrupt, it is not speech itself that is wicked, but the purpose for which it is used. Likewise, when the influencing power of dramatic poetry is used to glorify vice, it becomes wicked, but the medium is not evil in itself. Human stories will necessarily involve human struggles, which in turn involve human failings and human sin. These elements, as Socrates lamented, are inescapable, but they are not, as he feared, detrimental, so long as they are in their proper context. The story that only flatters emotion is like cotton candy. It offers pleasure that quickly dissolves and leaves nothing but a sticky reminder of its presence. A great story, like a good meal, gives both pleasure and health to the human soul. Furrowing his shadowy brow, Socrates weighed the ideas presented to him. Once again, said he, it would be shameful to deny truth when one claims to seek it. Your words, my friend, are not without worth. They walked on again, for a while absorbed in silent contemplation. One thing, I must confess, still troubles me, said the Greek to the Roman. We have seen several young students pursuing the various arts that prompted our discussion. Up here, in the sunlight and laughter, it is easy to see those arts as worth pursuing. But, Virgil, they will have to come down from this golden hilltop. Do they not do themselves a disservice by indulging in fantasy and entertainment, rather than soberly facing the world as it is? There is so much darkness, Virgil, and so much that will demand their courage. Are they not in danger of losing themselves in fiction? Socrates looked on his companion's face and saw sorrow in his eyes. You are Roman, Socrates went on, so perhaps you see the world differently. Their world is torn by strife and war. Glory for your people, but for them, for the rest of us, heartache and grief. Even if their activities are somewhat beneficial, can they afford to spend time pursuing imitation rather than actuality? Virgil smiled gently. They had come again to the rose ladies. The girl was still sitting there with her chin on her hand. Of course there is a risk, Socrates. In fact, your question called to mind the story of Don Quixote, who became so absorbed in his own fantasies that he missed the beauty of the true world around him. It is true that all of those pursuing righteousness must remain self-controlled and alert, so they do not fall prey to the enemy. Do you remember, however, my first answer to you? Whether in picture or in story, the students we have observed today are engaged in emulating their Heavenly Father, finding beauty in the ordinary, and sharing their human experience with one another. Yes, the world is full of darkness, but that is all the more reason to bring light and beauty to it. The Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Philippi, saying, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Whatever is true, whatever is right, whatever is pure, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." The arts of painting, poetry, and drama are a means by which people can delight in the creation and work of the Lord and bring to mind thoughts and themes that are good, true, and noble. Ultimately, just as the child learns his role in the family by imitating his parents, man learns his role in creation by emulating his Creator. This world is broken. Now we see but a poor reflection. Still, as long as the children of God continue to pursue pistis elpis ke ahapi, their works of art will reflect the glory of their Father. The two shades stood by the roses, stirred by the gentle breeze, and watched the girl on the steps. She seemed, or so Virgil thought, to be looking directly at them. Staring back at her, he asked, "Can she see us, Socrates?" "No, my friend," the other replied, "but it may be that she can hear our voices." "I hope, then, that ours has been a conversation worth listening to." Socrates turned to him, once more with a smile on his face, and said, "I hope so as well." A stronger gust of wind swept across the grass, ruffling the pages of the student's sketchbook, the scripts on the table, and the books on the steps, and as it faded and grew calm again, the two shades disappeared.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kaiser. I appreciate your reading. And I would like to begin by examining your understanding of the ideal disposition of the human soul. I think I'd like to reread your paragraph towards the middle of the paper where you say, Virgil answered, I mean that such passion is a necessary part of the story simply because it is a necessary quality of human life. You believe it to be unfortunate that without passion or emotion, we would not be human beings. Now, your assumption that passion is fundamental to the human nature is apparently where you have decided to part ways with Plato. And Plato seems to assume that the perfection of human nature and its refinement is by disciplining oneself not to give in to the passions. And this is also a position that Homer teaches us, because basically anytime someone gives in to their passions rather than controlling themselves, they crash and burn. Now, for Plato, kind of the ideal activity that he seems to epitomize as good human activity is doing geometry propositions, something that does not stir the passions, but rather exercises the mind and disciplines one in logical thinking. Now, given the fact that human beings and their passions seem usually to draw them into sin, how can you argue that it's not better to have ourselves disposed towards rational activity in the abstract realm rather than thinking upon stories and pictures that might rouse our passions?
Well, I have an answer to that. We are made in the image of God. God is obviously rational. He built this world on the basis of very rational principles, mathematics, geometry. However, we also have our God is a God of passion as well. We see it all throughout the Bible, through Old Testament, New Testament. He's grieving over his children. He's longing for his children. He's sometimes angry with his children because they're following a path of self-destruction. He loves passionately. And so if human beings reject passion altogether, then we reject half of ourselves. It's kind of what C.S. Lewis talked about, being men without chests. We have these inflated heads, but we don't know how to feel. And so learning how to feel, okay, let me be more clear. We cannot control what we feel necessarily. Our feelings are a response to the world around us. We can, however, control how we respond to those feelings. However, if our focus is on trying not to feel, then when we have a passion that just really overwhelms us and it's too strong for us, then we're not going to know how to respond to it properly because our focus has been on not feeling the passion. And so that's what leads to self-destruction. It's when it's not passion versus reason, it's passion acted upon properly. Obviously, there are some passions that are not to be acted on. Lust, the big one. How to put this in words, but we have to learn how to understand what we feel and how to respond to that, or else we're losing a very important piece of ourselves that comes from that image of God.
All right, thank you very much. I would like you also to address the fact that beauty in all the forms that it comes, whether literary or just the physical human form or architecture, always seems to take a good deal of fuss. You think about somebody like Dante taking 10 years to write the Divine Comedy. A huge amount of time invested into making a pretty poem. On Saturday, we are going to go down to St. Paul's Cathedral, and a building that took a huge amount of endeavor to build, very pretty, and yet took a great deal of endeavor. I mean, Friday night, there are young men and young ladies that will spend a great deal of time, all right, on simply human physical appearance. Well, given all the effort that would be put into this, one has to ask, what is the end? If you are a ship's pilot, what is your end? Getting people safely to shore. What is the end of pursuing beauty? All right, what is the end of getting your hair done? Or the end of a great big pretty church? Or the end of a long and elaborate poem? What is the end or the purpose in seeking this beauty?
Well, ultimately, it should lead us to God. It's, like I say in the paper, it's a means by which we emulate God, because God is beautiful. He is beauty. And so he has put this beauty into the world for us, and we are supposed to delight in him and the gifts that he has given us. And so that's why we pursue. And a lot of times we don't know that. I mean, you look at our culture today, very few would say that beauty points to God. However, that's really the underlying thread that goes through all of it. And I think that's what makes things beautiful. And we're not necessarily aware of that, but I think that's why beauty appeals to our souls, because it's drawing us back to our original purpose, which is to delight in the Lord and the work of the Lord.
All right. Well, then, to make it personal, are you going to get your hair done on Friday?
I'm going to do my hair.
What's the point of that?
To look pretty. We girls, we like to look pretty. Something in us that wants to look pretty. A lot of times we, and myself very much included, we kind of seek that prettiness to show off ourselves, and I'm very guilty of this. We forget that our beauty is a gift to us. We are supposed to, put some effort into ourselves. We're not supposed to make ourselves ugly on purpose, because God made us beautiful. He designed us, He knit us together in our mother's womb. And so if we reject that, we're rejecting something given to us by God that's kind of essential to us. It's learning to cultivate that properly and, keep the proper mindset when we do that, which is hard because we are fallen and very sinful and we can't do it on our own strength. But, just remembering who our Father is, that we are His children and that He delights in having His children be beautiful and, seek that beauty.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kaiser. Other questions?
This is lovely as well. It's beautiful. I was wondering, when you're in the section about the Republic, and Plato was talking about the passions, and it's sort of just how Plato is saying that the passions and beauty and all this, they has this passion and desire, however, bound soul to body and therefore to earth and imperfect matter. And I just was wondering about that thought and just the fact that beauty does seem to bind us to earth. I see the beauty of this place, and I love earth, and I love that I'm here, and I love that I'm alive, and you see beautiful people, and you love them, and you love earth, and you do become attached to matter, and that is a really real thing, and music and all that does that. And I'm just wondering, as Christians who are called to, think of this earth as not our home, and to think of ourselves as pilgrims and journeyers, and not, becoming attached to this, how do we rightly, deal with becoming bound to this earth for the beauty that we see?
That's a very good question. Very good. I actually have given this quite a deal of thought, because that's something that I've struggled with as well. I can't imagine leaving this place. There's so much here that's just so deep and beautiful and rich. I guess as Christians, what we do is when we see that beauty and when we really, have that moment of wow, I'm so glad I'm right here. That's when we remember that this isn't even the best part. This is the appetizer, you could say. The full course meal is going to follow when we are in heaven and we are with the Lord and perfection is restored and we actually see reality as reality. I love C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce. It's so beautiful. He talks about heaven being more real than earth, and he talks about that in the Chronicles of Narnia too. It's just more real and more vibrant, and it's the same, but it's different because it's perfect and it's it's with Him in His presence. And so that's kind of what that beauty is supposed to draw us towards. Yes, we do delight in the work of the Lord on this earth. There's so much that He's done. Just, the face of the earth alone, and then human beings and beautiful souls, beautiful bodies, if I can say that. There's so much here, and then just remembering that there's more. There's more coming.
On one of your books from Virgil says, I meant that such a passion is a necessary part of the story because it is a necessary quality of human life. And when we were reading Kierkegaard, he compared faith to being a passion. And just looking at it in the platonic way of passion being something that you want to stay away from, but us looking at faith as something that we define our lives as having, would you say that faith could be a passion?
That's a whole other paper right there. Yeah, I think Kierkegaard has a very interesting observation with that, because there is a lot of passion involved with faith. Basically, a pretty simple definition of faith is trusting God enough to do what He says. And when you trust God, you love Him, and there's passion in that love, this desire to please God, and I think that's where the passion comes in. I think faith is an active passion, I suppose. As in, faith causes you to act. That's a whole other paper, but I think he does a very good observation there.
Ms. Pryor, you mentioned that giving into too much passion can lead to sin. You cited lust and anger as examples. Is there, on the flip side, an extent to an overindulgence of logic being a bad thing? Basically, too much geometry can be bad for your soul?
Yeah, so let's say from the time you're old enough to do geometry for the rest of your life, you isolate yourself in a cabinet and do geometry all day, you're never going to have a conversation with another human being. You're just not going to know how to communicate with another soul, because you have focused in on one part of it. And that part is a very good part. It's wonderful to develop that, but if you focus in on that one part, you miss the rest of the picture. It's like, I don't know, taking a Monet and like zooming in on one paint blotch where you really like the colors, and like focusing on that one blotch of color and just being, wow, this is a beautiful color, but you miss the water lilies and the bridge. You don't see the whole picture. And so, yes, overindulgence in logic can be detrimental.
To your point about like God and passion and reason, Jesus often would show kind of his passion when he was angry at the tax collectors, and when he would weep when Lazarus died, and at different points, and in the garden before he was crucified. So I guess also in the Bible we see a lot of bad passion. You see a lot of instances in the Old Testament, and even Peter in the New Testament, where he kind of gets passionate, says something stupid. So what would you think is a practical safeguard against like going too far or something? What would be something that you could apply today that would be a safeguard against that?
Well, spending plenty of time in Scripture, so you can learn to distinguish between, godly passion and ungodly passion. Honestly, it takes practice. We're all prone to different types of passion are more strong in different people. Kind of learning our weaknesses, learning what needs to be controlled. Say, temper is a pretty easy thing. If I know that I have a bad temper, then first of all, making myself aware of that, learning to distinguish between, yes, I am angry for a good cause, but in your anger, do not sin. You don't lash out. You don't tear other people down, even though your anger might be just. It's learning one practical safeguard. It's really probably not that simple, but just learning to understand the distinction. Because if you don't know the distinction, then you're just lost. And then becoming more and more aware of that, more aware of how you respond. Maybe if something that starts to annoy you, it's going to make you mad, you remove yourself from the situation. Sometimes that's all you can do. You do literally flee from temptation. But it's a learning process.
I like to do it really well. Okay, so I want to talk about, you talked a lot about man being created in the image of God, and therefore his going life is to emulate the nature of God. So in the same way, would you say that man's art is an imitation of creation?
Very much so.
Okay, so art, and we would consider art if made in God as beautiful. So what would you say about beauty or art that we would that a lot of us can't see as beautiful? You know, like a lot of modern art is not very appreciated, and or we look at corrupted beauty or corrupted images or ideals of beauty, especially in society today. People give out ungodly and evil ideas of beauty. So if art is an imitation of the beauty of creation, how can it be corrupted? And what would you say we should do to keep away from that?
Well, how can it be corrupted? Mankind can corrupt just about anything. That's true. I mean, it's like Augustine says that evil is just kind of this parasite that leeches from the good, because you look at evils of the world today, so many of them, it's a twisting of what God originally designed. And so yes, we are fallen, we are sinful, we can twist just about anything. We're unfortunately very good at that. How do you avoid it? You just remember the purpose. I mean, as believers, we just remember why we do what we do. It's not, I don't know, so much of our culture just flies in the face of what God intended. Just, you know, the enemy just seeking to tear it apart. So what we do is we remember why we do art, why this is beautiful. Modern art, I'm not a huge fan of, but there is some that is kind of pretty, kind of interesting. And I mean, can strange blotches of color be beautiful? I suppose they can. Painting, all the arts, like I said, it's kind of about finding the beautiful in the ordinary. So, you know, maybe take a cracked flower pot and stick it on a dirty table and take a picture of it with a light in a certain way, and you realize, that's beautiful. I don't know why, because it's just a cracked flower pot on a dirty table. There's like, you know, nothing particularly meaningful, but you see something very ordinary in a different way, like from somebody else's perspective almost, and you see some beauty in that. So I guess that would be my answer. But
so a follow-up question.
Okay.
What would you say then would make a great imitator of beauty? What would qualify someone as someone who has been able, what's the secret to capture the beauty of cracked pot on a dirty table?
I wish I knew that I'd be a better artist. Honestly, I think there's something that some people are gifted in. I look at the paintings of the Dutch masters. Some of them are a little strange faces, but you look at these paintings like, wow, this person has an incredible gift. I'm a fairly decent painter. I still can't do that. I can't necessarily capture the way that Vermeer did, or Van Dyck, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, all of these people, and they had so many different styles, and they were gifted. They practiced and they were gifted. But I think it comes back to, you can have the gift, but if you don't have the purpose, you're lacking something important. And so kind of pair it up. You can have the purpose but not the gift, and you can do some things that are very good, but not necessarily great. But if you have the gift and have the purpose, then that, I guess, is what makes a great imitator of beauty.
That was a delightful paper. I really enjoyed it. And you have a quote about halfway through your paper that says, "Surely as there is a potential for harm, there must also be a capacity for good." And I was wondering, in your opinion, does it matter whether the author of the book or the play or the creator of the painting has that purpose for taking up the capacity for harm and the capacity for good, whether or not we can appreciate the beauty in something if it wasn't created with that purpose in mind?
There are certainly a lot of really beautiful writers who aren't necessarily aware of that purpose. There are some writers who may be very skilled, but use that skill to just tear apart what is good, just kind of wallowing in evil and sin and kind of glorifying it. And that is something that never, that's always corrupting, that's never good. But I mean, we read so many pagan authors who had beautiful ideas. They had no concept of the true God. Their gods were a mess in many ways. And yet they still had this awareness of goodness. And we all kind of have that awareness, from the beginning of the world, God's invisible qualities. Oh, I think I said this. His divine nature are clearly seen because it's in our design. It's imprinted on us because we are printed in the image of God, but we aren't necessarily aware of that, and sometimes that's okay, and we do something beautiful, but then there are others who really just, turn away from that and seek to tear it down, and that's harmful. Does that answer your question?
Lovely paper. It was absolutely beautiful. I really enjoyed it. Towards the end, I think it was Socrates that said about how he kind of was contradicting Virgil and saying how the world is full of darkness and how do you keep this passion. But I think my question along lines is we as humans we do have passion in us, and throughout our lives we try and see it as ordinary, like you were saying. And so how would you keep that passion, that fire in us, through our lives? Because sometimes I think we tend to lose that passion. Sometimes it just kind of fades in a sense. And so how would you keep that?
We can't do it without God. We just can't. We're very finite, very fallen. On our own strength, yes, that passion's going to die. It's just going to kind of fade. We're going to burn out because we don't have, I guess you could say, the fuel, to use that analogy, to burn longer. Because God is eternal and because He is perfectly good, through Him is how that passion stays alive. Just, it says in John, I think it's 14 or 15, remain in me, 11 times. Just remain in me. I am the vine and you are the branches. Apart from me, you die. So just remaining in the vine, that life source. Because without Him, we're going to fade. So please have
Okay, so I loved your paper, by the way. It was very pretty. And you said at one point they do themselves a disservice by indulging in kind of the fantasies and the fun stuff. And so I myself, I love reading novels and fun stuff like that. So I guess my question is, where's the fine balance between being too much in, I guess, the fantasies of the world, or or just reading the Bible all day long? You know what I mean? Where's the fine line?
It's really hard to draw. It depends a lot, I think, on the person. Just knowing what your weaknesses are. That's really just a big thing of, know thyself. It comes up again and again in our readings. Just understanding where you are weak and where you need to guard yourself. Because we do have to remain self-controlled and alert, because our enemy's out there and he's prowling the roaring lion. So nothing wrong with these fantasies. There's some stuff that, it's kind of cotton candy. It's light, it's fun, and you finish it, and there's really nothing to it, but in small quantities, it's not harmful. Well, maybe. But, if you eat cotton candy for every meal, every day, you're going to die. You're just going to have no nutrition, and you're going to die. Happens a lot, but so it's about balance, reading scripture, spending time in the Word, because it is God's Word to us. Spending some time with the fun stuff, because I think sometimes we need the fun stuff to, wake us up and remind us, oh yeah, we're all humans and we're kind of silly sometimes. We do really weird things. And then maybe some heavier stuff, just richer, like what we read in GBT, these ideas that are pretty heavy and dense, and we have to get our mind around it. And I guess you could say that's a little more like exercise. But just balancing that out and, you know, being aware that, okay, this kind of fantasy I can read plenty of and not suffer much. This kind I'm a little bit addicted to, and, you know, I'm spending more time in that world than I am. Well, if you're spending more time in that than scripture, you probably need to reevaluate a little bit. Balance.
Thank you.
Wonderful job, Jordan. That's great. So you're a painter, and I was just wondering, were there certain insights, things that you learned in considering this topic and writing the paper that helped you as a painter in learning that process?
I think the concept of finding beauty in the ordinary. It kind of came to me a while ago as I was beginning work on this and considering the topic. Just, you know, looking back on the paintings that I like the best, looking through my photography. I'm not a great photographer, but I've gotten some good pictures. Looking at the ones that, you know, I can really look at and say, wow, that was beautiful. And just kind of seeing that common theme there, I guess it's opened my eyes a little bit to more of the world. I do very little painting from reference, whether real objects or photographs, because it's hard. I do a lot out of my own head, but I've kind of like opened up a little bit more, like, okay, I can do like maybe this tree or this, you know, landscape from somewhere I've been. So it's opened me, broadened me.
I really enjoyed your paper, by the way. My question is, how would you explain when different people find different things beautiful? Is it because of a failure to appreciate the beauty in certain things, or is it just their opinion?
That's a very good question. We're all very different. We are made in the image of God. We're all humans, but we're very, very different in that, which is something very wonderful. And so we all see things in different ways. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, I can find the sun on the rocks absolutely gorgeous. Someone else might be saying, okay, it's a pile of rocks. It's just the way I happen to see it. And you know, there are some things you do kind of want to cultivate an understanding of beauty and just kind of like try to broaden that from a very narrow, limited focus, just because there is so much out there to discover. But it's a matter of perspective.
On page 3 of my copy, Virgil says, what distinguishes a great story from a poor one is whether that emotion is used to point toward what is good. So I guess looking at it from the flip side, do you think a story that describes evil characters or actions could point its audiences toward what is good, to, in a sense, smear the audience of what is corrupt? And taking that furthermore, if you do believe that, would you agree that a story that describes the faults of others and evil of the world might be more effective than a story that only describes the good and righteous and the purpose of directing an audience toward what is good?
It is a very good question. Milton is the example that came to mind, actually, because it is the story of the fall. He starts out with Satan in hell, kind of having a conference with all his demons, and talking about his plan to tear mankind away from God. And then it follows Adam and Eve in the garden through the temptation, through the fall, and through kind of the first aftermath of the fall. And so there is a lot of evil in that story. I mean, you have the good and perfect, but it breaks. The good guys don't necessarily win in the end, except for that hope, that kind of prophecy of Christ coming later, that so you have that promise of redemption. And I think Milton could have done that in so many ways, and the way he chose it is so interesting, especially starting out from Satan's perspective. I mean, that you really can't get more evil than that, I don't think. So in a sense, he does describe evil characters and evil events and, you know, brokenness. But there's that promise of redemption. Milton could have left it at Adam and Eve's despair. And, you know, that's pretty scary. But he brings in that prophecy, that promise. And so even in all this sadness, like, oh man, mankind is ruined, it can be fixed. And I think that's a distinguishing feature. I mean, another book, Brothers Karamazov, you see Fyodor, Dmitri, Ivan, 3 out of the 4 just really messed up for the most part. Fyodor and Dmitri are almost always drunk. Ivan's very hostile atheist, and he goes crazy. Really dark, broken family. But you have Alyosha's speech in the stone at the end. You have that remembrance, like, we can still, in Christ, we still have that goodness, that promise of redemption. You know, remember this moment of goodness, carry it with you for the rest of your life. Such a beautiful speech.
I think one question that I would have after that is, do you think a story like those 2 books that describe evil and sin require a speech or phrase that describes the hope or redemption? Or do you think without those that the audience would be able to come to their own terms with that?
Right. That's a very difficult question. I don't think it has to be as explicit as a speech or phrase, but it needs to be present. It needs to be there, kind of underlying everything, or else, you know, you have kind of this like dark pit of mess, and nothing out of that. Reading a book like that is just kind of like drags you down. Like you put it down exhausted, in a sense. It's just like, oh, I need something to lift me up, get my soul going again, because that was exhausting. But one more question.
Yeah, very well done. I just wanted to comment on your statement. Painting has a special ability to bring to light the beautiful and what is ordinary. So, painting has the ability to highlight beauty in simple, ordinary objects. But would you say with more complex objects, there's sort of a diminishing of that improvement? Do you not see as much of an improvement in more complex objects?
That's a very good question. Yes and no. So paintings will always fall short of reality. That's the truth. We're not as good as God, so we can't match or exceed the reality. And so what we have to do is we have to simplify it. And yes, sometimes in those complex objects, we don't necessarily see the whole thing. The artist has to pick a particular detail, a particular facet of that he wants to, he or she wants to focus on, and you know, kind of simplify it. Stories are very, very simplified portions of life. It's the same thing. So you do lose a lot of complexity, but you see one facet of it in a different way that kind of makes it beautiful. And then another artist might paint the same thing in a different way, and that takes a different facet. So, yeah, yes and no.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kaiser.
Are you happy that you're done, George?
All right. Okay, let's everybody stand up. And repeat after me.
Thank you.
Come on, folks. Juntos para Gapi, juntos para Gapi, oh Deus con cosmos, oh Deus con cosmos, oh Deus con and E.
All tyranny of the one and E.
Evoken.
Evoken.
Ine basso Cristevon.
Ine basso Cristevon.
Isa from me ablite.
Isa from me ablite.
Ole Gizowin.
Ale Gizowin.
Puntos cargapisen.
Puntos cargapisen.
Oteos ton cosmon.
Oteos ton cosmon.
Oteorio no maneni.
Oteorio maneni.
Evoken.
Evoken.
Ine basso Cristevon.
Ine basso Cristevon.
Isa from me ablite.
Isa from me ablite.
Ole Gizowin.
Ale Gizowin.
Alright, sit down, please. Okay, we're going to get started with our next day presentation. However, I have some students sitting out on the patio. I acknowledge students sitting on the patio. So all of you on the patio, please stand up. Find yourself a seat inside. And we do like to have the family, the student be able to find a space in here. However, other adults, I don't think we have room for you or younger siblings. Until we get all the students inside, we're going to need to have younger siblings and that sort of thing be outside. So, anyway, come on in, DVG students, come on in. You guys need to be inside. And so this is Doug Moore. This is Doug Moore. Can I get you to get your seat, Jordan? And so guys, any seats that are open, come on in. If there's a seat that's open, there's lots of seats open. Come on Chandler, this seat's for you. Chandler right here. Autumn, that seat's for you. Haven, that seat's for you. Come on in, guys. Hustle to All right, we're going to be moving right on. We're going to be a little late for lunch, but we're going to move right on. Hope to get to it as quickly as we can. So without further ado, if I can have all of your attention, it's now my privilege to bring to you Mr. Marcus Charney and his paper, The Cerebral Iron Man.